Welcome to the Week 14 salary exploitation. You guys, if you noticed, if you listened real close, I almost said Week 4. That would have been a strange move by me, but it's Week 14. We're coming off a week where there were a lot of good matchups and a lot of really solid plays and like team stacking opportunities. I kind of get the feel this is a very different week, especially last week we had a lot of pay down options at running back. Not so much this week.
Yeah, this week's a little bit different. And obviously, I think when you take New Orleans and Atlanta off the table for the main slate, they're in the Thursday slate. Obviously there's New England's on Monday night, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we're kind of getting some offenses this week where things are a little bit different. We're getting a lot of the bigger boys. On the Monday night, Steelers are there as well. So yeah, I mean things are a little bit different, but obviously there's some good spots to go this week, but it's not as eye appealing as it was last week.
Right. Let's hop into quarterback. First things first. Blaine Gabbert against Tennessee. This Cardinals team kind of sticks around. Larry Fitzgerald's been incredible. And Tennessee is not good. Their record does not represent how they play in these games. Their defense is not very good. Their offense is not very good. Should be plenty of opportunity for Blaine Gabbert here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're not, expressing a ton of emotion towards playing Blaine Gabbert, but he's a potential option this week at 4,800 on DraftKings, 66 on FanDuel, 24 on Yahoo. Like, he's been bad. He's turning the ball over a ton. There is that, but he's producing too. Like, he's thrown 104 passes in 3 games. He's averaging 17 fantasy points in that span. Obviously, his worst week was this past week, but put up 19 fantasy points against a really good Jacksonville defense. Put up 21 against Houston. And as you mentioned, I mean, matchups very soft for Tennessee. They're 24th in DVOA against the pass. They're pretty pedestrian in terms of fantasy points allowed. Like, at these prices, he should be able to pay that off pretty handsomely.
Blaine Gabbert hasn't been Blaine Gabbert bad this year, though. You know what I mean? There's like average quarterback, below average quarterback, where Blaine Gabbert's playing right now, and then there's like rookie year, sophomore year Blaine Gabbert. He's not that anymore. He's actually like relatively competent. So especially with as many attempts as he's getting, I think he's viable. Dak Prescott against the Giants. I think we saw last week finally, the schedule got a little easier. They played a little easier matchup, and it was back to Dak Prescott looking like a young stud quarterback. So is that kind of what you see against the Giants?
Yeah, I think so. And, Alfred Morris come off a really strong game. Like, they finally kind of had a balanced attack. Prescott obviously didn't rack up the fantasy points. We saw Morris with the majority of it, and obviously the punt return touchdown. But going this week, obviously a New York team that's just kind of in shambles defensively this year. I'm kind of looking at him more on DraftKings, like only 5,600. I'm not really looking at Yahoo or FanDuel. I mean, 77 on FanDuel is not bad, but he's not quite the bargain that he is on DraftKings. So for 5,600 for a guy who has some rushing upside, a relatively safe floor. I know he obviously hasn't shown that since Zeke went down and with the offensive line injuries, but I think even on the road, it's a fairly safe spot for Dak at 56.
Yeah. I mean, other than that, again, you look at each matchup, and I went through each game last night pretty quickly. There's not a lot of great games this week. It's really ugly slate compared to, I thought week 13 was pretty straightforward. Obviously Tom Brady didn't, throw any touchdowns, which stunk, but it made sense. The fantasy points were there. They just went to the running backs instead of the passing game. So, this week is not going to be straightforward. Running back, let's talk about 2 guys that it's really tough to figure. Now, Joe Mixon, not so tough to figure, at least within the last 3 or 4 weeks since Jeremy Hill's been gone. They pretty much give him the feature role, relatively cheap. Against Chicago this week. 5,200 on DK is probably what we're all looking at. 71 on FanDuel, 24 on Yahoo, a little more fadeable prices. And then Lamar Miller against San Francisco. It's a great matchup. Lamar has been sort of tough to figure this year, but let's first talk about Mixon.
Yeah, and obviously, we're talking before the Monday night game. So Mixon has yet to play yet. But we got to look at his attempts. I mean, 20 plus rushing attempts in each of the last 3 games. He's shown some upside as a receiver. He's broken off a couple of really big screenplays. He has that in the arsenal. You look at the Chicago defense. They're definitely not a bad defense. I don't think we've really said that all year. This has been a pretty middle of the road defense that can pick up their play at home. Good for Mixon. He's at home. He's playing in Chicago, who's on the road this week. So, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, 7,100 on FanDuel, it's 24 on Yahoo. Like, those are fadeable prices if he's going to become chalk this week. DraftKings 5,200 is a little bit of a different story because that is fairly cheap, especially when you see kind of the guys that are above him. You're kind of like, wow, wait, really?
Yeah. And Chicago, we've talked about this multiple times this year. On the road, much different than at home. And then, Miller. I mean, why not, right?
Yeah, obviously I think he's a better PPR player because, he can get those 4 to 5 catches that give him a little bit of a better floor over on DraftKings compared to FanDuel. But I think we obviously need to keep a look at him this week. I do think 17 to 20, 20 or even a little bit more touches this week against the San Francisco team that obviously struggles against running backs is very much in play. FanDuel 6,600, I think, as an RB2, like he's a really nice price tag, but 5,800 on DraftKings, obviously a pretty quality player there. Yeah, I mean, as you said, Miller just really hasn't been a guy this year that we can trust. He's shown a couple of big weeks. Like the workload's still there. He just hasn't really been efficient.
Definitely. Wide receiver, you picked a fun guy to talk about. Although sort of annoying more than anything else for me, we never got our discount weeks on Josh Gordon. Like he instantly is 6,700 on FanDuel. Like that's bull crap. 21 on Yahoo, 55 on DraftKings. Like not one week did we get him at a cheap price. Even in a bad matchup last week, like he was still, not cheap. So he's a great play this week. With the way they targeted him last week. I do think it gives Corey Coleman some sort of contrarian appeal, but Gordon, yeah, at those prices, I mean, it's still a pretty good value against this Green Bay secondary. Although they did shut down Mike Evans, I'm not sure if they shut him down or whatever, man. Whatever.
Well, I mean, let's talk kind of Josh Gordon and Corey Coleman as a whole because we saw Gordon come back and instantly we saw Coleman be targeted only 4 times. He didn't end up with a catch at all last week, which I found to be a little bit surprising. I expected Gordon to come back and be involved. I didn't expect really 11 targets in the snap counts that he got. Like I just really wasn't expecting it, but we kind of got that coach talk let up all week like he's going to be featured in this offense, and I kind of was hoping that it would be a little bit of a bust. But I mean, 4 for 85, obviously the inefficiencies are going to be there with this Cleveland passing game, but 11 targets is hard to kind of overlook. I mean, the price tags, once again, I expect him to be kind of popular because for 11 targets and the guy everyone loves, they're still going to pay these price tags. So I think he's going to be a fadeable guy in GPPs as well. But I mean, the matchup is here. 4th most fantasy points allowed to wideouts. And like you said, Corey Coleman is going to be a cheaper contrarian option.
Certainly. A guy we're gonna disagree on probably is Emmanuel Sanders. I do love the price. I can't do it, man. I can't do it. Tell me what you like.
Well, I like Emmanuel Sanders as a person, as a player. I hate everything else. Trevor Simeon's just completely erratic. We saw that this past week. Him and Demaryius Thomas, combined for I think 4 catches or something like that on 18 targets. It was abysmal. The prices have further dropped with these guys. Sanders, obviously the cheaper option. I'll keep an eye on this moving forward, but obviously you expect Morris Claiborne to shadow one of Sanders or Thomas, probably going to be more on Thomas. So I think Sanders is an interesting play at home. As good as the Jets have been this year, they've been kind of bleeding fantasy points to passing games. Like 7th most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They're bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks this year. Not looking at the quarterback here play. I do like Sanders, though, as a GPP dart throw because at this point, I mean, I do think Sanders has at least one breakout game before the season ends.
Right. You mentioned the last guy here, Golden Tate. Looks like Stafford's probably going to play, even though that hand is definitely hurt. So something to monitor. If he doesn't play, then I'm sure, Tate might be less of an option. But this is a tremendous matchup for a secondary that can't tackle versus a guy who is hard to tackle. I mean, that's really all the math you have to do. Golden Tate against Tampa.
And I feel like he's not at value, but he's kind of underpriced for this matchup.
Yeah, he's a great. I mean, Tampa's just been getting roasted. Obviously, so if you're wondering what happened in that Green Bay game, Green Bay realized they could run on them pretty early on, and that's all they did, and that's how they won the game. They just didn't even bother, and they were winning the whole time. So, the Devontae Adams, Brett Hundley thing didn't work, but it's because they knew very early on that they could exploit the running game. So I wouldn't take much into account in terms of, Tampa shut down Devontae Adams. No, they didn't. It was just a one-sided affair.
And it's interesting this week because obviously Green Bay gets Cleveland, like kind of another situation where you want to look at the passing game. I mean, are you back? Are you going to be back on looking at the backers kind of in
Gosh, I think you have to be. If you were on them on Tampa, I think you have to be. And Cleveland's run defense is much better. Now, they've been worse, and they've continued to be worse the last few weeks, but they're certainly better than Tampa, and I think that's, where we start to see Devontae again. So I think I'm going right back to that. And he's in a similar price range as Tate.
Yeah.
Tight end, you listed Austin Seferian-Jenkins against Denver. Denver is just a shell of themselves. I don't think the defense would be that bad if, the offense was even below average, but they're arguably the worst offense in the league right now. So, that makes most defenses crumble, even good defenses, when you're constantly being put in bad situations. Jets are good. Okay, hold on. Jets are not good, but I'm rooting for them. You know what I mean? Like, they're a ragtag group of trash, and they're making it work. Robbie Anderson, ASJ's kind of been down the last few weeks, but he's who you brought up here. Certainly a good matchup.
So would I be crazy to think that Todd Bowles is possibly one of the best coaches this year?
I was going to say after yesterday, could he be the first guy who doesn't have a playoff team but still wins Coach of the Year? Like, that's how good of a job he's doing. This team is terrible. Like, even the players that are doing well, it's like Jermaine Kearse, It's amazing.
Yeah. You didn't want to talk about Robbie Anderson.
No.
Let's talk Austin Seferian-Jenkins here. FanDuel, not a discount. He's $5,900. The tight end pricing continues to go up there. $14 on Yahoo, $36 on DraftKings. You mentioned the last kind of down weeks. Tight ends on this article has kind of been the same guys that we've talked about year in and year out, or week in and week out. But Denver, second most fantasy points allowed to tight ends this year. New York continues to move the ball. I still think they even move the ball in Denver this week. McCown's obviously been very competent out there in throwing the ball. So I think ASJ has been a guy, had a couple of tough breaks. He's had a couple of catches, touchdowns, obviously reversed or brought back on penalties. Like, he's kind of had an unlucky year. Like, the potential is still there on a week-to-week basis. I know the targets have been a little bit volatile of late, but I still think with these Denver corners, it should funnel a little bit more to ASJ.
Oh, he's the Calvin Johnson Award winner for 2017 of just getting blasphemous reversals every week, seemingly. So, yeah, I mean, you could probably add another 20 fantasy points to his total on the year throughout the weeks. So certainly a guy to pay attention to. Defense this week. Now, I'd say for about 3 or 4 weeks now, I've been on just start the Chargers or Jaguars or Patriots. I think we can mix it up this week. This is kind of a week where you can kind of change things up. I don't see the ultimate chess match is going to be Jags secondary versus Russell Wilson. I'm so excited for that game. Jags are an elite pass defense, and Russell Wilson has no running game. So it's going to be an absolute battle. But I don't think Jags are in play this week just because Russell Wilson is so effing ridiculous,
It almost seems like that game could be the potential where Wilson maybe throws 2 picks, but also 300 yards and like 3 touchdowns still.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned the Bills and Bengals. Bills, obviously a train wreck right now, but they're playing a team that's a train wreck in Indy. And Cincinnati against Chicago at home. They're the team I kind of looked at as, all right, this might be one of my main plays this week just because, it's that time of year. Cincy's, even though they're bad this year, like their defense kind of tightens up and they've been erratic this year, but kind of good.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this week it's finally kind of a mid-range pay down week. Like there's some teams below 3K on DraftKings you can take a look at. We don't have the super expensive outside the Bills on FanDuel. 5,300 on FanDuel is a little pricey for the Bills. Like that's a pretty steep drop off for a team that really is kind of folded a little bit, in terms of the defensive side. They're not the same team that they were for the first 5-6 weeks. Really since, post Darius, they've been bad. But 31 on DK, 18 on Yahoo, like this Indy team just allowing a ton of sacks, 50 on the year. It's in Buffalo, really tough place for people to play, especially this time of the year. So Bills, I think on DK and Yahoo, I'm in on 5,300 on FanDuel. Like if I have the cash, I'll go that way. But $700 or $800 or $900 from some of those mid-range teams, I think I'd rather save that cash.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is going to be, again, a messy week. So things aren't as straightforward. Stacking Alex Smith with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce was the easiest GPP winner of the entire season, and they were 1%, and I just didn't make one. I made 30 lineups. I just didn't. How did I not make one? But
Russ, you've been making Alex Smith lineups for.
It's unbelievable.
Since I met you, I believe, yeah.
How I can't ever get him right. It's unbelievable. But so that's where we're at. And do you have any other thoughts before we head out?
No, it's week 14. Like we're getting into the worst fantasy time of the year. Although it feels like every week has been week 14, 15, 16 this season.
Kenyon Drake was nice. So if Kenyon Drake can continue to do that at 5%, I'm in.
Yeah, it was great.
If you want to check out this article, certainly head over to dailyfantasycafe.com. If you like what we're doing here, certainly give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thumbs up, thumbs down, comments. Give us the interaction. I want your interactions in my mouth. And, we do have a full slate breakdown a little later in the week. And we will see you guys in week 15.